A 13-year-old black girl stood in front of a sea of white faces, and they laughed until she spoke. The courtroom was silent, but not the kind of respectful silence that comes from solemnity. It was the kind of silence packed with disbelief, with judgment, with doubt. Every eye in the room turned toward the girl, standing at the center, 13 years old, skinny, braids neatly tied back, a second-hand navy blue dress that hung just a little too big on her frame. But her chin was lifted, her spine straight as steel. Zara Jackson, she stood alone behind the defense table, her hands clutching a weathered leather notebook. She didn't speak right away. The courtroom, mostly white, mostly older, watched her like a strange animal had wandered in from the street. A man in the gallery whispered, "Who let a child in here?" A woman in a crisp blue suit muttered, "This is a real trial, not a spelling bee." But Zara didn't flinch. She opened her notebook slowly, deliberately, and flipped to a marked page. Then, without hesitation, she looked the judge straight in the eyes. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but steady, "under Illinois Statute 735 ILCS 521, and 7 a minor may represent a family member in civil proceedings if acting in pro se capacity and if no legal counsel is available or willing." The words dropped, like a stone into a still pond. A beat of stunned silence followed. Then the judge blinked. He leaned forward slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Excuse me?" Zara didn't miss a beat. She repeated the statute, this time even slower, even clearer. She had memorized every syllable. She had rehearsed it in front of her bathroom mirror for weeks. The judge sat back, clearly thrown off. He reached for the thick folder in front of him and began flipping through it in a daze. He wasn't expecting this. None of them were. At the prosecution table, Thomas Reed, the man known for never losing a case, sat frozen. He had faced murderers, white-collar criminals, and defense attorneys with decades of experience, but now he was staring at a 13-year-old black girl who had just outmaneuvered every adult in the room with one sentence. His jaw clenched. He leaned toward the microphone. "Your Honor, I request a short recess." The judge didn't respond right away. He just stared at Zara for a long moment. It was like he couldn't decide whether to be impressed or terrified. The gavel came down, sharp and quick. 15-minute recess, the judge muttered. "Court will reconvene shortly." The room exploded into murmurs. Reporters scribbled, lawyers whispered. A few people stared openly like they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But Zara didn't move. She just stood there, notebook still in hand, watching Reed. He wouldn't meet her eyes, not yet, because something had just shifted in that room. Something big. And for the first time since her father had been taken away, Zara Jackson wasn't just a little girl anymore. She was a threat. Your father may never come home again. 3 months earlier, the late afternoon sun spilled across the front porch of the Jacksons' modest home on the south side of Chicago. Laughter echoed from the yard, where 8-year-old Ethan chased their scruffy little dog, Tyson, in delighted circles. Their mother, Lila, sat on the steps with Zara, a cup of coffee in hand, her eyes soft with that rare kind of peace. Zara leaned against her mother's shoulder, eyes half closed, content. For a moment, life felt untouched by the world's harshness. No headlines, no sirens, just sunlight, laughter, and the scent of cut grass. Then the black sedan pulled up to the curb. Zara sat up straight. 2 white men stepped out, suits, badges clipped to their belts, their faces blank, cold, as if they'd knocked on 1,000 doors just like this one, and knew how the next 30 seconds would go. Her mother stood up, her coffee cup falling and shattering against the steps. "No, no, 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 please, no," Lila whispered, backing away as the men approached. Ethan stopped chasing the dog. Tyson barked once, then fell silent. Zara didn't understand at first. Then she saw the taller officer shake his head. He didn't even need to speak the words, but he did. "Ma'am, we're here about your husband, David Jackson. He's being charged with armed robbery." Her mother collapsed to her knees. Zara ran to her, clutching her arm. "Mama, what's happening?" "What did they say?" But Lila didn't answer. She just held her face in her hands and wept silently. Her shoulders shaking like a storm had ripped through her bones. The neighbors came out. Doors cracked open. Curtains shifted. A woman across the street leaned out of her doorway, arms folded. "Another black man behind bars," she muttered to no one and everyone. "Ain't no surprise." The officers didn't stay long. They weren't there to explain, just to inform. They left behind a piece of paper on the porch, an official notice. A date, a charge. David Jackson, armed robbery, maximum penalty life in prison. That night, Zara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She heard her mother crying softly in the next room, trying not to wake Ethan. She heard the words again, spoken without sympathy, just cold delivery. He may never come home again. But even through her fear, her grief, and her confusion, something else began to grow inside her, doubt. Her father wasn't a criminal. He was the one who fixed the neighbor's broken fence last winter, without asking for a dime. The man who always brought donuts to the church cleanup crew. The man who had hugged her tightly every single day and told her, "Zara, this world might not always be fair, but you never stop standing tall." None of it made sense. How could they say he robbed a store when he was helping Ethan with his science project that same night? How could they arrest him without real proof? Zara didn't know much about the law, but she knew something was wrong, terribly, painfully wrong. And that was the moment, the exact moment, when a seed was planted deep inside her, a seed called truth, a seed called justice, a seed that would grow into a storm. If no one believes in us, then I'll learn to speak their language. The nights after her father's arrest were the worst, not because of the silence, but because of the sound of her mother crying softly into a pillow behind a closed door she couldn't bring herself to knock on, because of the way Ethan asked, "When's Daddy coming home?" And no one had the courage to answer. Zara couldn't sleep, not when the world she knew had shattered overnight, not when the man who tucked her in every night now sat alone in a cold cell, not when everyone around her acted like he was already gone. She lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, heart pounding with fear, and something else, a quiet, stubborn fire. She didn't know what to call yet, but it burned. In the early hours of the morning, while the house was still and dark, she slipped out of bed, tiptoed past Ethan's room, past her mother's door, and into the kitchen. There, under the flickering yellow light of the old stove hood, Zara opened the warm backpack her father used to carry to work. Inside were receipts, files, and one thick book he always said he'd get around to finishing one day, Illinois Civil Procedure, Revised Edition. She set it on the kitchen table and opened to the first page. The words didn't make sense, not at first, but she didn't stop. Every night, while the world slept, Zara read. She made notes in a marble composition notebook, looked up legal terms online, watched videos of real trials on a second-hand tablet that glitched every 5 minutes. Sometimes she cried when she didn't understand something, but she kept reading because, if no one was going to speak for her father, she would learn to do it herself. One night, as she scribbled down something about burden of proof, her mother came into the kitchen. Her face was pale, eyes swollen. She stood there silently, watching her daughter surrounded by books, papers, a cold cup of tea. "Zara, what are you doing?" Zara looked up. "Learning," she said simply. Her mother blinked. "Baby, you're just a child." Zara's voice didn't tremble. So was Trayvon. So was Tamir. "If they think we're powerless because we're kids, then I'll show them how wrong they are." Her mother's lip quivered, but she said nothing. She walked over and placed her hand on Zara's cheek. For the first time in weeks, she smiled a small, broken, beautiful smile. "Your daddy always said you were born with fire in your chest," she whispered. Zara nodded, her eyes burning now with something more than sadness, determination. And from that night forward, Zara Jackson, 13 years old, grieving, scared, but unshakably driven, began teaching herself the law, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Because she knew if she didn't fight for her father, no one would. She was just a child, and yet she studied the law like her life depended on it, because it did. The days that followed blurred into a quiet, focused routine. School became an afterthought. Lunch breaks were spent at the public library, nose buried in legal dictionaries. Evenings were for court transcripts and sticky notes. Nights were still lit by the dim yellow glow of the kitchen, where the law became her language, her shield, her sword. Zara built a case the only way she knew how, with questions. And the biggest question of all was this: how could her father have committed the robbery at 11:15 p.m. if he was at home with them by 11:20? She remembered hearing the microwave beep that night, her dad reheating leftovers, laughing at Ethan's bedtime, knock-knock jokes. And yet, the prosecution's key witness, a man named Paul Carter, claimed he saw David Jackson fleeing the scene just minutes before police arrived. Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She wrote every detail out on index cards, color-coded them by witness, location, and timeline. She pinned them to her bedroom wall with tape and hope. Then, one afternoon in the library, she found it buried inside the digital archive of discovery documents, pages scanned in grainy black and white, a restaurant receipt, Angelo's Diner, dated the night of the robbery, time-stamped 11:12 p.m., and whose name was on the card used to pay, Paul Carter. Zara's heart skipped. Angelo's was a 15-minute drive from the site of the robbery. That meant he couldn't have been there, couldn't have seen anything. He lied. She stared at the receipt so long her eyes burned. Then she made a copy, 3 actually, one for her, one for her father, and one for just in case. But even with that breakthrough, she hit walls. When she tried to get deeper into the court records, most files were redacted or locked behind online paywalls. She needed help. So she turned to the one person she knew who could hack into his school's Wi-Fi just to stream basketball at lunch, Miles. He was quiet, smart, and had been her best friend since kindergarten. And when she showed him the timeline, the cards, the receipt, he didn't laugh. He just said, "Okay, I'm in." Together they dug deeper. Miles bypassed the court system's public portal and found archived files labeled internal use only. Most were corrupted. Some were password protected, but one folder opened, and inside it was a scanned affidavit, signed by a court clerk, confirming that a different prosecutor had originally been assigned to the case, not Thomas Reed. Zara's eyebrows furrowed. Why did Reed take over so late in the process? She needed someone who knew the system better than Google, someone who'd lived in it. That's when she remembered the old woman at the library help desk. Mrs. Ellen Harper, white hair, sharp eyes, and a nameplate that read, "Retired Court Clerk." Zara approached her cautiously, explaining that she was doing a school project on court procedures. But Ellen wasn't easily fooled. She glanced at the folder in Zara's hands, then at the fire in her eyes. After a long pause, she leaned in close and whispered, "Meet me here tomorrow after 5 when the librarians go home." The next evening, Zara waited by the microfilm machine. At exactly 5:12 p.m., Ellen arrived, no small talk, just a flash drive and a whispered, "You didn't get this from me." Inside that drive was a full version of the prosecution's original file, and what Zara found nearly made her knees buckle. Pages had been deleted, witness testimonies edited, and one surveillance tape, originally listed, now completely missing. Someone had tampered with evidence. Armed with everything she had gathered, Zara did what she thought was the next logical step. She walked into the law office of Pearson, Blake, and Knox, holding her receipt, her notes, and her father's charge sheet. The receptionist barely glanced at her. A tall white man in a crisp suit came to the front. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is about my father's case. I found something proof." The man took the paper, skimmed it, then laughed dryly. "Little girl, this is real law, not a school project." He handed her papers back without a second look. "Come back when you're old enough to understand what you're holding." Zara stood frozen for a moment. The rejection stung more than she expected. But as she walked out of the building, her grip on the papers tightened. "They don't have to believe me," she muttered. "They just have to hear me." They called her a child. She called their bluff. The courtroom was colder this time, not physically, but in the way the walls seemed to lean in, the air sharpened with quiet hostility. Zara felt it the moment she stepped up to the defense table again. The stares, the whispers, the subtle sneers. This time, she wasn't a curiosity. She was a problem. Thomas Reed sat at the prosecution table, calm and composed on the surface, but his fingers tapped against the desk with practiced precision, the kind of rhythm a man uses when something's gone off script. The judge, a tall man with silver-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Court is now back in session." Zara stood, notebook in hand, shoulders squared. The judge glanced at her, then at Reed. "Miss Jackson, you wish to continue your statement?" Zara nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe the prosecution's key witness has given false testimony." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Reed leaned forward, voice smooth like syrup but laced with warning. "Objection, Your Honor. She has no legal standing to make that accusation." Before the judge could respond, Zara spoke again. "According to Illinois Code of Evidence Rule 607, any party, including a pro se litigant, may attack the credibility of a witness. The judge blinked. He looked down at his notes, then back at her. You memorized that? Zara didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence was louder than yes. The judge leaned back. Proceed. Zara opened her notebook, turned to a marked page, and walked slowly toward the witness stand. Paul Carter sat there, smug and self-assured, like he'd done this dance a dozen times. He crossed his legs, raised his eyebrows. Mr. Carter, Zara said calmly, you testified that you saw my father fleeing the crime scene at exactly 11:15 p.m. Carter smiled. Correct. And you were sure about the time? I check my watch every night when I leave the diner. Old habit. Zara nodded, then held up a copy of the receipt. This receipt, she said, turning toward the judge, shows that Mr. Carter paid for a meal at Angelo's diner at 11:12 p.m. She let the words hang. Angelo's is located 15 minutes from the crime scene, without traffic. A collective inhale swept through the courtroom. Carter's smile faltered. Well, maybe I got the time wrong. Zara stepped forward, her voice sharper now. You didn't get the time wrong. You lied. The room erupted. The judge banged his gavel for order. Reed stood abruptly. Your Honor, we request a brief recess to review this new evidence. The judge looked over his glasses, unimpressed, but he nodded. Recess granted. 15 minutes. The gavel struck again. People whispered. Some stared at Zara in stunned silence, others in admiration. She stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, but her expression unreadable. Miles, sitting in the back row, gave her a small nod. Her mother clutched Ethan tightly, tears in her eyes. Zara exhaled. It had worked. She had cracked their witness. She had spoken their language, and they heard her. But as Reed stepped away from his table, he didn't look angry. He looked focused, like a chess player who had just lost a rook but still had one more move. Zara saw it in his eyes. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The man who was declared dead walked in, and the truth followed. 15 minutes passed. Zara sat motionless, notebook on her lap, eyes fixed on the courtroom door. The receipt, the affidavit, the screenshots, everything she had worked for suddenly felt fragile in her hands, too fragile to hold up a man's life. Then the doors creaked open. A hush fell over the room. A man stood in the doorway, tall, thin, pale from shadows rather than sickness. His coat hung loose on his shoulders. His eyes were sunken but burning. He looked like a ghost, because to this room, he was. Samuel Pierce, the man Zara's father had been accused of robbing, the man the courts had declared dead, the man whose absence had imprisoned her father. But he was here, alive. The judge rose slightly from his chair. This has to be some mistake. But the man stepped forward. No, Your Honor. I'm Samuel Pierce, and I was never dead. The gallery gasped as one. Pens dropped. Mouths opened. Phones lit up. Thomas Reed's face didn't change, but Zara saw the way his hand twitched just once against the desk. The judge's voice was barely a whisper. We were told there was a body, a fire, DNA. Pierce nodded slowly. A fire, yes, but no DNA, no confirmation, just a man who vanished, and a story that made everyone stop asking questions. He turned his gaze, and it landed on Zara. She stood up slowly. Her palms were damp, her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. Why come back now? Pierce paused, then gave the simplest, most terrifying answer she had ever heard. Because you made them nervous. And when powerful men panic, they get sloppy. The judge called him forward, but Pierce hesitated. Zara stepped toward him and opened her notebook. She showed him the receipt, the altered affidavit, the L Holdings email header. His eyes locked on the letters L. His jaw tightened. Edward Langston, he muttered. The name fell like a curse. I worked for one of his fake corporations. I found something: bank trails, fake charities, offshore laundering. I was going to expose him. He looked at the floor, but I said it to the wrong person. And 2 nights later, my apartment burned. They found something, a body. Not mine, but it was enough. His voice cracked just once. They needed a death, and I let them have one. Zara felt her fingers trembling, but not from fear, from fury. And Reed? She asked. Pierce's eyes flickered to the prosecution table, then back to her. He was supposed to clean it up, but your father, he asked too many questions, wouldn't take the plea, so they buried him instead. The courtroom remained silent. Reed didn't speak, didn't flinch, but the stillness of his face was too perfect, like marble hiding a crack. Zara saw it, and Pierce saw it too. He turned to the judge. "I'll testify, but only if she stays." He pointed at Zara. "She's the only one in this room I trust." And in that moment, something shifted between them. For the first time, Zara didn't just feel like a girl with a notebook. She felt like an equal, a force. She had cracked a lie buried under fire and silence. And in doing so, she hadn't just revived a man, she had resurrected the truth. The law wasn't broken. It was bought. Zara couldn't sleep, not after what Samuel Pierce had said in that courtroom. That night, she sat with Miles on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by notebooks, files, and half-drunk cups of cocoa. Miles leaned closer to the screen of his old laptop, eyes narrowed. "Okay, look at this chain. L Holdings, cross-referenced with Carter Logistics Shell Company, barely exists online." He clicked through screen after screen, lines of code and documents flashing by. They're all connected paper trails that loop into each other. Fake employees, bogus tax write-offs. Millions of dollars move through charities that never held a fundraiser. Zara whispered, "And it all leads back to Langston." Miles nodded grimly. "There's no name on the paperwork, but initials, offshore accounts, donation records. It's him." The deeper they went, the darker it got. One company funded political campaigns. Another laundered cash through non-profits, everything neat, legal on the surface, but underneath, a network of corruption wrapped in respectability. And Thomas Reed? He wasn't just a prosecutor, he was part of it. Miles paused, then turned to her. "If you release this, you know what could happen, right?" Zara stared at the screen, her father's name in bold letters on a court transcript, the word "guilty" printed beside it. She clenched her fists. What's already happened is worse. The next morning, Zara sat at the kitchen table, printing copies of everything they found. Her mother walked in, blurry-eyed, holding her phone. "You were up all night again." Zara didn't look up. "I found something." A name, Edward Langston. She said it slowly, like saying it too fast might summon him. Her mother froze, then softly, "I know that name." She sat down, hands trembling slightly. "Years ago, I worked for one of his subsidiaries, just a payroll clerk. I found a file that didn't make sense. Employee names that weren't real, bonuses with no justification." Her voice dropped. "I flagged it to my supervisor. He told me not to bring it up again." Zara leaned in. "Then what?" Her mother's eyes glistened. "A man came to my apartment the next day. He told me that sometimes people ask the wrong questions and end up regretting it." She took a shaky breath. "That night, I packed a bag, grabbed you and Ethan, and left. I didn't even give notice. I was scared, Zara." Zara's voice was soft but firm. "I'm scared too, Mama, but I can't stop." Just then, glass shattered. All three of them froze. Tyson, their little dog, began barking wildly. Miles ran in from the front hallway. Someone broke the back window. Zara grabbed her notebook. Her mother pulled Ethan into her arms. They crept into the kitchen. No one was there now, just wind, broken glass, and on the floor, an envelope, no address, no seal. Inside, a single piece of paper, "Walk away." The letters were typed, clean, precise. Her mother's hand covered her mouth. Ethan started crying. Miles picked up the note. "They were here, watching us. They called the police. No one came, no knock at the door, no patrol, no report, just silence." That night, Zara sat with her laptop, Miles beside her, her mother pacing the kitchen. She plugged in the flash drive and opened the audio file. Samuel Pierce's voice echoed through the speakers. "Edward Langston owns the courtroom. He owns the lies. But the moment people start hearing the truth, his empire cracks." They zipped every document, every file, and uploaded it to the FBI, to journalists, to a Dropbox folder, with a timed release in case something happened to them. Miles looked at her. "Once we hit send, there's no taking it back." Zara didn't hesitate. Click. The email flew into cyberspace. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she whispered, "Let's see what they do when the truth hits back." The next morning, she stood in front of the courthouse again, dressed in her blue dress, braids freshly tied, notebook in one hand, her mother's hand in the other. She looked up at the tall pillars, at the flag fluttering above, and she said to herself, I'm not afraid of them. They should be afraid of me. Because now she wasn't just fighting for her father. She was fighting to bring down everything that tried to bury him. She didn't just defeat them, she unmasked them. The courtroom buzzed like a hive moments before the Queen arrives. People had heard rumors about the girl who cracked a federal conspiracy, about a man once dead who returned to testify, about a billionaire whose name no one dared say aloud. And yet, when the doors opened that morning, Edward Langston walked in, not in handcuffs, not with shame, but with a navy suit, a tight-lipped smile, and a title under his name tag, financial advisor to the state's legal consultant. He took a seat quietly behind Reed, who didn't even turn to look at him. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Reed, who is this man sitting at your table? Reed cleared his throat. Mr. Langston is an advisor, Your Honor. He's here in an observational capacity. The judge frowned. Observation doesn't give access to counsel table. Langston smiled faintly. I'm simply here to offer insight into the financial impact of certain allegations. He said it with the ease of a man used to buying silence. But today, there would be no silence. Zara stood slowly. The courtroom turned with her. She held up a small speaker Miles had programmed to play just one thing. Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to present a recording, obtained legally, which contains direct evidence of conspiracy to commit a crime. The judge looked weary, but nodded. Proceed. Zara pressed play. A voice crackled through the room, deep, cold, calculated. Take care of David Jackson. I don't care how. Just make it disappear. Understand? The room froze. Then another voice, clearly Reed's. Understood. I'll handle it quietly. Gasps broke out. Chairs shifted. A woman in the gallery dropped her pen. Langston stood up. That could be anyone edited, fabricated. Zara didn't flinch. We traced the audio file to a secure line, registered to your private foundation's office. The metadata confirms the timestamp. This was recorded 2 weeks before my father's arrest. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mr. Reed, do you deny this recording? Reed's face turned red. He turned to Langston. She said you destroyed the original video. You said no one would trace it. Langston laughed, bitter and low. And you were the one who promised the girl wouldn't get into court. Yet here we are. The judge slammed his gavel. Enough. Either one of you speaks again without my permission, and I'll hold you both in contempt. But it was too late. They had begun to unravel, blaming each other, snapping, names flying, senators, judges, police chiefs. A network built in the shadows was spilling into daylight, and then the doors burst open. Black jackets, gold letters, FBI. The agents swarmed in like a wave. Reed stood frozen. Langston reached for his briefcase, but 2 agents were already there. Edward Langston, you are under arrest for conspiracy, witness tampering, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Thomas Reed, you are under arrest for prosecutorial misconduct, perjury, and conspiracy to commit murder. Neither man resisted because they knew it was over. The judge leaned forward slowly, then looked at Zara. His voice was low but full of something rare in that room, respect. Miss Jackson, do you have any final statements before this court adjourns? Zara swallowed. She looked around at her mother, clutching Ethan, tears on her cheeks. At Miles, who gave her a quiet thumbs up. At Pierce, sitting still, tears in his own eyes. Then she turned to the crowd. This wasn't just about my father. This was about a system that hides the truth, that silences people who don't have power. But today, she lifted her notebook. We proved that even a kid with no badge, no title, and no money can still hold the powerful accountable if she refuses to be quiet. The room erupted in applause. Reporters surged forward. Cameras clicked a moment too big to ignore. Outside, the sky was bright, clear blue. Zara stood on the courthouse steps, notebook clutched against her chest. Her mother stood behind her, arms around both kids. Pierce walked past, giving her a simple nod, one survivor to another. A reporter shouted, Zara, what's next for you? She looked into the camera. Calm, steady law school, justice today. But what about tomorrow? The sun was just beginning to set when David Jackson stepped through the front door of his home for the first time in nearly a year. He looked thinner, older, the grey in his beard more pronounced. But when Ethan shouted, "Daddy," and launched into his arms. None of that mattered, not to him, not to Zara, not to Lila, who stood frozen before bursting into tears. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to, just held each other tightly, as if afraid someone would take this moment away again. Later that night, the house smelled like sweet cornbread and roasted chicken, his favorite. Music played softly in the background. Ethan fell asleep on the couch. Tyson curled at his feet. David looked at Zara across the table, eyes full of pride. "You saved me." She shook her head gently. "I just told the truth loud enough that they couldn't ignore it anymore." He smiled. "That takes more courage than most people ever find." Much later, as the house settled into sleep, Zara sat by her bedroom window, notebook in her lap. She opened her phone to check her messages. One new text, no name, no number. "You made enemies. Be careful." She stared at it for a long moment, no fear, just understanding. She closed the phone, opened her notebook, and began to write. "Today, I fought for my father, but tomorrow, I'll fight for others." Her handwriting was small, steady, a quiet promise. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, Chicago's lullaby. But inside her, there was peace. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel helpless. She didn't feel small. She felt ready not just to survive injustice, but to challenge it, to chase it, to end it, one case at a time. If this story moved you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Every click, every share, every new subscriber helps us keep telling stories that matter. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join us for more powerful, heartfelt journeys like this one. Your support means the world to us.